Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Never Mind the Chaos. My name is Leonard Simpson, partner with 2020 Financial Advisors, and I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Chastain of Chastain Jones Law. And it's our pleasure today to have as our guest, DeAnn Chase of Chase Law. Hi, DeAnn.
Hello, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. And before we started the recording, we were talking about uh, the what we're hoping to get out of this recording and you talking about your journey. Uh, I always like to start off with knowing about the person. We'll get into talking about the practice of law, but I like to start with, you know, where did you start in life? And who was responsible for your formidable years, before you ever got to the place you are today in the practice of law.
Hmm, interesting. I was raised in a very blue collar family. Um, my dad worked at General Motors for over 35 years. My mom drove a school bus. And so but really taught me the value of hard work. And my father, was actually quite an entrepreneur. So while he would be working, on the factory line, he always had all these entrepreneurial ideas, and so he always had a lot of interesting things that he was coming up with. But I was, first to go to college, and certainly the first to go to law school, and so it was just sort of natural perseverance and grit. Um, my father worked at General Motors in Northern California, and I was, born and raised in this like nice little community up in Northern California. And then the plant closed from Northern California, and my dad got transferred from Northern California to Oklahoma City. So I moved to Oklahoma City, the beginning of my eighth grade year of school, which was quite traumatic. And then ended up moving back to California for my like senior year of high school, and went to college actually up at UC Berkeley. So it was sort of a path, right? In different environments. I think it really taught me, a skill that I use in the law is it taught me about adaptability and building relationships with other people and sort of doing it without really realizing it.
Quite interesting. So were they building cars in California? They had a plant?
Well, this was in the early 80s and 70s.
I know that.
They
Was that
were,
the
yeah.
Fremont? Was that the Fremont plant where they were building the Camaros?
I don't know what they were building there, but I know it closed in 82.
Hmm.
And then actually Toyota took it over,
Mhm.
and it was like the NUMMI plant. And I hear they're building Teslas there actually. So I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah,
But
I think that was the Fremont plant because I lived in Fremont, and a
yeah,
lot of my classmates, when they graduated, went to work at that factory because it was right down the road, and they were
interesting.
they were pumping out Camaros, and so all of my buddy, well, not all of them, but many of my buddies bought them and crashed them.
Yeah.
Well,
Right. There you
yeah, yeah,
go.
a young single guy driving a Camaro. What do you go
Yeah,
figure?
what could
Yeah,
go
I love it.
wrong?
I
That's
love it.
so. Did you have siblings?
I had a younger brother,
Mm-hmm.
and also when I was growing up, my parents actually took in a lot of foster kids,
Is that
actually.
right?
So they would have, so we would, it was sort of my brother and I, and then we always, seems like we always had like another couple of kids in the household. And so all the time I was growing up, if I got a bike, then, my brother and sister got a bike and different things like that. So, again, adaptability and getting along with people.
And so you went to your undergraduate was in Berkeley,
Mhm.
and what was that degree in?
I majored in rhetoric.
Rhetoric?
Yeah,
Didn't
that's
know
an
that.
actual degree.
I didn't know that.
So I majored in rhetoric. My parents, like I said, were very blue collar. My dad said, my daughter's majoring in BS at Berkeley. And yeah, but rhetoric was actually really a great major because my skills growing up was I loved to write. I was a big writer. And so rhetoric is it's very analytical. So like I always compare an English major to a rhetoric major, right? So an English major will read a particular, work of literary, work, what have you, and will tell you sort of what the author said. But a rhetoric major would take a look at the same literary piece, but look at who was the author, what was the time frame, how was the book structured, how, different, was it persuasive or what have you. So it's a way of thinking.
Fascinating. And so is that a, is there still a curriculum for that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they still have rhetoric in universities, and it really turns into like political science and a different sort
Yeah.
of thing like that.
So was that your thinking? What were you ultimately going to do with that degree?
I was just diving into my skill set, which was writing,
Okay,
and it interests me. I was interested in communications, not politics.
got it. And so you finished Berkeley and
So finished Berkeley and just headed right in directly into law school.
okay.
Just kind of
What
following
was
my skill set.
your thought process as far as did you know what you wanted, what kind of practice you wanted to have, or were you like me, who was yeah, I really had no idea until I got a job.
Oh, I had no idea.
Okay.
I had no idea. And it was just kind of graduating from college. What are you going to do next? Oh, and again, following my skill set, it was writing. And at that time, when you're graduating, and they're like, well, you can take the LSAT, and I'm like, okay, so I'll do that. And then, and just kind of it just went naturally into law. But going into law school, I had no idea. And you go into law school, and they sell you this myth that you can do anything with a law degree. Go to school. You don't need to know what you're going to do going into law school, right? You can do anything with a law degree, which, as we know, isn't necessarily the case when you're coming out of law school with a big bill.
So what was your experience in law school?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. But I went to Southwestern University here
Okay.
in Southern California. So at the time, Southwestern and it's like the early 90s.
Mhm.
Southwestern was a six-story office building in downtown Los Angeles where you would hear like gunshots on the next street over.
Hmm.
But it's grown over the years, and they bought an old historical building,
Mhm.
kind of shut off the road, made a beautiful campus, and it's really actually quite a wonderful university. But I enjoyed law school because, again, it was just, for me, it was the thought, the way of thinking is really came naturally to me, and that's just what I loved. I loved the research and the writing and the analytical way of thinking. But coming out of law school, I was sort of trying to find my place. And my last semester of law school, I worked for the district attorney's office doing felony preliminary hearings in Linwood, Compton, and Watts. So it was a really challenging time. And I thought I wanted to be a DA, district attorney, doing criminal law, and that was, it was really interesting, and I wanted to do jury work and that sort of thing, and did felony preliminary hearings and took witness testimony and all that. But coming out of law school, the DA wasn't hiring; they had a freeze on, and so I interviewed around and found insurance defense litigation, which is, they say you kind of stepping out of law school, you take the job that pays, and those jobs were paying. And so I went and I worked for a firm in downtown Los Angeles, and I was doing product liability defense, commercial transportation defense, and I defended businesses that were being sued in a lot of different ways. So
So you went through law school kind of on the cusp of uh, what I call the Lexus era, where um, online research was starting to really become viable. Is that do I have the timing right of that?
yeah, it was just starting out pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
But we still had a choice between LexisNexis and Westlaw, coming out of law school. Um, But yeah, and then but when when I was working in the big law firms, a lot of the research we were doing, were like hard, the books and like
Mhm.
the Rudder Guide and different things were when you would have to change out the supplements, the
Right.
paper.
The old Shepherds with the advanced sheets and all of that. I mean, I only bring that because it really was a different time and it was a different way of practicing law. I mean, you really needed to have, I mean, word processors were really not very good. Computers really weren't very good, at least in
Mhm.
my view. And so, you needed to have a secretary. You couldn't just talk into a box and have it, develop a document, right? Like you can now.
Yeah, no, it was a very different time, definitely. All the pleadings, for court, when we were preparing, all these discovery and exhibits, and you'd have these trial notebooks with, and
Hmm.
all the exhibits that would go along. We killed a lot of trees, actually. There's a lot of paper, and I remember when I was first starting out, and I would do everything by fax. Right. So the old school was, snail mail. You'd put a letter in the mail and, your service timelines, were from the time you deposit it, proof of service was the time you deposit it in the mail.
Hmm.
But I wanted answers. I wanted to get information out, and so I would do everything by fax at the time. But it's different now.
So that was the beginning of that that particular area of law for you, right? And that was just by chance.
It was just by chance. It was different, different opportunities that kind of arose, and so I said earlier, my dad worked at General Motors. My mom drove a school bus. And then while my dad was still working at the factory, my mom took up over the road truck driving.
No.
Yeah, so she drove over the road 18-wheeler trucks. And then my dad, when he retired, went on the road with her. So they drove trucks over the road. So when I was graduating from law school, I I I don't know how I stumbled upon commercial transportation, but I found this law firm that actually did trucking law. And it gave me kind of an in when I was interviewing to say, well, my parents drive trucks. So I've actually been in a truck. I've gone over the road with trucks. And so I ended up doing, catastrophic injury and wrongful death cases, defending trucks, buses, limousines, the commercial transportation.
That was a real niche.
Yeah, and product liability. And I always found those cases to be so fascinating because, there's an accident and, again, these were big cases because I worked in a big law firm. But it was always so interesting to, to reconstruct the accident and to determine what happened and under what circumstances and different times. And of course, it was all about liability, right? A allocation of fault for purposes of settlement or what have you. But it was really an interesting area of the law. And I also say when I was young and single and the cases were interesting and I really enjoyed practicing law until we started a family.
Hmm.
And that really changed everything for me. Really did. Yeah. So
So
I didn't.
how did it change things for you? I mean, we can kind of guess, but in your life, what changed?
Well, even at that point, some of the firms, it was sort of frowned upon, right? For women to take less time, take time away from billable hours or what have you,
Hmm.
to raise a family. And then I was doing litigation. So I say I've been in virtually every court in Southern California, right? So when we had our first child, I would literally be standing at the daycare waiting for the door to open at 6 a.m. so I could hand them my baby so I could drive and be in court in Barstow, Bakersfield, San Bernardino, what have you. And then you'd be in court or mediations, till all hours and trials. It just was exhausting, and I just really wanted to be, as we all do, like as parents, I wanted to be there while my kids were growing up, and so. when I went, so I have two kids, and when my daughter was born in 2002, I went right back to the practice. And then when my son was born in 2004, I approached the partnership at the firm that I worked at the time, a fantastic firm. They still refer cases to me to this day, which I'm very proud of. A great group of lawyers. And I approached one of the partners and said, I want to work part-time, and and all that I had worked out this whole thing. I researched it and everything like that. And they I say they let me do it. It wasn't really in their business model.
Hmm.
And they kind of said, we'll do it for you, right? Because part-time women working in law firms and big law firms was not a thing, right? It really wasn't. It was like, and they kind of said, but don't let out kind of what you're doing, that sort of thing. So I did part-time litigation for a while, but it's litigation. It's adversarial. And it's kind of interesting now. You look back, like I just did my reporting right for my CLE, and you have to now they make civility an actual unit of CLE, like is now required.
Hmm.
At the time, it was the lack of civility, the lack of professionalism, the ability to be an advocate for your client, but still be able to grant courtesies in a professional manner. So that was really, I think, what drove me out of the litigation context. And so I was talking to a fellow lawyer, and expressing how I thought it was interesting that she had her own practice here in the South Bay in Southern California. And she said to me, DeAnn, there's a big gaping hole in the middle of the South Bay for a good business lawyer. And I said, yeah, I wish I was one of those. The thought of starting my own law firm was not really on my radar, but it just kind of seemed to be the next natural step to be able to set my own hours and to not do litigation. And so I did it. I opened my own law practice in 2007.
So tell us about that. How did you start, and what was it like opening those doors?
Well, what happened was I had a couple of friends of mine who had done litigation, had partnered up. And so they partnered up, and then so I went to work for them with the idea of making a transition away from litigation. And they were doing, like, one of the partners was doing business and estate planning, another partner was doing construction and litigation. And so I was kind of mentored by that attorney who's doing the business side of things. And but I kept getting sucked into the litigation. Oh, can you cover this deposition? Can you file this motion? Can you do what have you? And and one day I got kind of frustrated at the way this one partner in particular was running the practice. I won't name names. And so I said, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And then that's where that entrepreneurialism that I grew up with, I got excited about, oh, I can start my own practice. And I started looking at space, and I was like picturing, put the law library there, and receptionist here. And I went to my husband and said, oh, honey, I'm starting a law practice. Will you come look at this building on the other side of, around the corner? And he's like, you're doing what? What are you doing?
You're not buying a building.
No, apparently not. So he said, DeAnn, usually people, when they're going to start a business, they do a budget and a business plan, because again, we as lawyers don't really think of ourselves as business people, but we are.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, fine. So I found a building that the ground level was all, I guess it's called Fusion Suites. So they were executive suites, very plug and play,
Hmm.
where I got an office, and they had reception, conference room, everything like that. And I just put an ad in the local paper, South Bay Business Lawyers is how I started. And the phone just started to ring.
A great story.
So what's the nature of your practice now? You're not doing insurance defense, or are you?
No, no, I don't do litigation at all. Like
Okay.
I stopped litigating. I say for my own personal lifestyle. So Yeah, so I started in 2007 doing business, right? So entity formations, contracts, and what I would say, and we talked about it, a little bit about it earlier, is sometimes we feel like we're so, kind of in this pigeonhole of a practice. But what started to happen is people would come to me and say, "Hey, we're forming a nonprofit. Can you do that?" And I'd say, "Sure, I can." And then I would go on, on Lexis and take a class on nonprofits. And then, and then the next thing you know, I'm putting, nonprofits together. So I do a lot of nonprofits, and a lot of the nonprofits, I don't advertise that I'm a nonprofit lawyer. It's general business. We serve as outside general counsel for businesses is what we do. But it started with, LLCs and corporations and contracts. And then what I found is then those businesses need trademarks, right? So, and I would build relationships with other lawyers that were specialists. And so after a while, I'd say, I have trademarks, and I would start referring my trademark work to an IP lawyer. And then we would have, with fee sharing arrangements, what have you. So then eventually I brought trademark in-house. So now I have a practice that serves businesses from a structural perspective. We do the entity formations, contracts, trademarks, employment, franchise, leases, so the real estate aspect of things kind of wrapped into it. And then I have really strong relationships with great lawyers that are specialists in their field. And my clients need estate planning, for example. So I've got great referral relationships with estate planners, but I'm not going to take up estate planning at this point in my career. And sometimes I have clients who are taking on investors where we're deep into securities law. So I've got a really great lawyer that works on securities. And so I, kind of bring those things in. And I added a franchise lawyer to the practice because I had clients who either had a concept that people were coming to them saying, "Oh, I want to do it, I want to use your method and model in my area." So brought him on. And so I say we're a team. I'm a generalist in a world of specialists.
So there are two of you in the office, yourself and the attorney that specializes in franchise law.
No, so I have in the office, I have an associate, a paralegal, and an administrative assistant. And then I have of counsel relationships with four other lawyers. So the employment, the franchise, the intellectual property, and I'm getting ready to add another lawyer for real estate and just general corporate work. So 6 lawyers
But yeah, of counsel.
of counsels.
So do your I'm just interested in your business structure a little bit. So do your of counsel people have their own support staff, or do you provide that for them?
So they all have their own practices.
Okay.
And they have their own individual practices, but to the extent that they're working on with me on my clients, then we provide the support. So we have, we handle all the intakes and the billing and that sort of thing. They'll invoice us for the time that's spent, and then it's all about we've got different relationships with different lawyers. Either there's fee splits. Some lawyers will pay me like administrative to cover the administrative costs, so or a marketing fee, for example, because I do a lot of marketing. And I've got a social media team and, I've got staff. So they'll pay me like an administrative fee. And then based on origination, we'll do different splits.
So it doesn't sound like there is a need, or have you thought about the need of actually bringing in a young associate, another associate into your office, into your practice?
Been there, done that.
Okay. That
So
would
I
be,
started in,
yeah.
I started in 2007 and started to grow and grow, and then started to hire lawyers, and then grew some more and started hiring young lawyers, right? Because then what I found is I was competing against larger law firms for the salaries that they were being paid. And so I was relatively small. So then I would have to hire younger talent, shall I say. And they involved a lot more. And at the time I was happy to provide mentoring and like an educational experience, because that's really what I was able, since I wasn't able to provide them with that big high, pay structure. I said, oh, well, you get mentoring and it's a great environment and different things like that. But there's a lot of supervision. They were very expensive, actually. And and then what would happen is when I had really good associates, they'd be gone. I mean, they'd say for great opportunities, by the way. I mean, the lawyers, in fact, I have a lawyer who's coming back who left, we were saying she left my firm 7 years ago. And she was an amazing associate who I had hired. And then she left to take an in-house job for a growing company. She grew their in-house department from one lawyer, her, to 8 lawyers. And being a woman, she started a family recently, and she's looking for the independence that comes with having, your own practice, what have you. So she's coming back. So what I've learned with hiring those younger lawyers is that, you provide them with mentoring and that sort of thing, but ultimately, there's a lot of turnover that naturally happens.
Yeah, that was our experience as well. Is that, as you say, you get, A players, people who are really good. You invest in them, you teach them, you train them, and then they leave. And it is a challenge, and I think there's also, and maybe you'll agree or not, but it does seem like the new generation, the millennial generation, plans on leaving. They plan on jumping around,
Mhm.
and which was not part of my DNA. I mean, I expected to. I was a public defender for 16 years. I thought I would be there forever. But
Um,
circumstances changed, ultimately I wound up opening my own firm. But um, yeah,
mhm.
many of the associates that we brought in, especially like right out of law school, I mean, it was really clear that they had no intention of staying beyond, maybe a year or two tops.
Mhm. Right. Well, yeah, no, I mean, I was like you. I mean, when I first started my first firm, I was looking long term, like
Hmm.
partnership track. That was at that time. I mean, that's kind of was the thing that you were aiming for, is you were aimed, make partner.
Hmm.
And then and I switched firms from one to another just for more opportunity, right? More money, more opportunity. And like I said, they were a fantastic firm. And I was on partnership track because that was kind of the expectation. So to be able to step off partnership track was really quite a detour, right? Because like you said, when we started practicing, that was what you did. You didn't just go and start your own firm, but it's true. A lot of these young lawyers are not going to stick around.
Yeah.
So what,
Well,
I
well, I
was
was just
gonna
going to say the technology has made it so much easier than it was. Um, I mean, you could literally run your firm off a cell phone if you, not a great idea, but you could. Um, as opposed to, back in the day when you actually needed books and libraries and Selectric typewriters and that sort of thing.
Right, exactly. The typewriter. What a concept, right? We could type all that stuff up. Well, and COVID really changed a lot of things too. So, and like I said, I don't litigate anymore, but I see litigation. I act as registered agent for my clients. So if my clients are being sued, the lawsuit's delivered to me, and then I'm, tendering it to their insurance carriers or what have you. Or sometimes, because I have that litigation brain, I can get an extension of time to respond or what have you. But I really see, that just practice of law has changed. So, I mean, to take depositions like online or to have Zoom mediations, it's really an interesting concept.
Yeah, I just did a sentencing today on Zoom, or I'm sorry, it was a restitution hearing. But I mean, that in my wildest dreams, and I would have never thought that that was something that would happen until COVID.
Right. Well, and again, when I first started practicing law, I was in my car driving to Bakersfield, driving to Barstow, because by the way, when trucks get involved in accidents, it's usually in the middle of nowhere, Palmdale, Lancaster, three courts in San Diego. But I would get in my car and drive because they expected you to be in the courtroom and in the courtroom on time, right?
Right.
The judge could be late, but you had to be there waiting for the judge to take the bench.
Right. Well, there
So,
wasn't really any other option in those days either. So,
No, and that's when court call was kind of getting started. And that was great to be able to just call in, and instead of like sitting there in the courthouse. But the big firms didn't like it. They liked you actually in your card billing from the time, you know.
right.
It's
so with the
different.
age of technology and AI, how do you see that changing the profession long term? And is it positive?
I just think that I think AI is just the latest in a stream of innovations, if you will, that are just really degrading the practice of law and degrading the respect really for what our profession provides, right? I mean, there are online legal services, right? So people say to me, have already before AI had started to really kick in, people are like, can I form my own LLC? Can I, download my own template contracts, different things like that. So it's just a nuance on it now where people are like, somebody asked me the other day, well, can I draft my NDA using ChatGPT? And I'm like, well, you could, but I've always said whether you're downloading a template or you have AI drafting your contract, you should still have a lawyer actually review it before you hand it to someone to sign, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think that the age has been where, trying not to deal with lawyers, kind of trying to take lawyers out of the equation in a lot of ways.
Interesting.
How do you think let me ask it in two stages. One, there's the non-lawyer ownership movement that they're doing. I think Arizona and Utah are allowing that at this point. Um, and I think it's going to come. I mean, I think it's going to come. Well, so let me ask you, do you think that that's going to happen, and how do you think it'll impact things?
Well, I don't, I will. Will it happen? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it really depends. I mean, even in California, for example, they're talking about having these paraprofessionals,
Hmm.
right? Paraprofessionals. It's kind of an interesting kind of concept. So having these non-lawyer lawyer firms, I don't know. I don't know if it's going to come to California, but I don't think it's a good thing because the only reason the non-lawyers want to come into the practice of law is, to to profit. It's all about profitability, and I think
Right,
again, it's just a further degradation of the
right,
law, the practice of the profession of law, and turning it more into a business, right? Which they're
right.
doing.
Well, and the counter to that, one of the challenges of small law firms, I think, is the ability to get capital, right? So if you can't have a non-lawyer investing, um, the capital has to basically come out of your pocket, right? Or Mr. Visa is your partner, right? You're running your firm on credit cards. And that's always been a problem. And I saw a lot of firms during COVID, functionally have partnerships with American Express and Visa and MasterCard because that was the only way they could keep the boat afloat at 21% or whatever their ridiculous interest rates are. So, um, that's the contrary thing. It is a business. Running a practice is a business, and it has
Mhm.
to be profitable, or you can't keep your doors open. But there's a money problem for many firms. So that's the contrary thing. I agree with you. I don't like it at all. But I understand where some of that's coming from.
But I don't think necessarily non-lawyers investing in these practices is the answer. I mean, like I said, a lot of lawyers don't think of themselves as business owners
Hmm.
either, right? So they're just not good business people, right?
Mike,
Right.
And so, I work with entrepreneurs and business owners and professional practice owners.
Hmm.
I actually help lawyers put their partnerships together. I help doctors and accountants and all of that. But I tell every business owner, like, you start up and you start to develop that corporate credit, and then, you get that line of credit before you need it. As we know, it's hard to get credit when you need it, right?
Hmm.
You want to get it before you need it. But it's about, being able to scale your business
Right.
and make a profit. So,
Mike,
and I do think that if it's opened up to these institutional investors like coming in, first off, when the only time so far in my experience seeing institutional money coming trying to invade the practice of law is really in online tools that remove lawyers from the equation,
Hmm.
right? It's chatbots and it's online questionnaires. So I don't think, again, I think it's going to dilute the practice of
Hmm.
law, but we may just be swimming upstream.
but yeah, it's interesting because Mike and I were talking about this before you joined us, and because he actually does consulting with attorneys. And Mike, you mentioned to me that you are shocked at the number of attorneys that do not even have run a P&L.
Yeah, it's. I mean, DeAnn's absolutely right. You know, a law firm is simply a business that provides legal services, right? And all of the business principles still apply. Somehow we were deluded in thinking in law school that we were some kind of magical entity, and those rules didn't apply to us, but they do. And so I'm always amazed when when I'm consulting with a firm, or I'm talking to them about whether or not I can help them. My most common question is, well, you know, do you have a current P&L? And they look at me like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what that is. And I'm like, well, how much money did you make last year? Well, and they don't even know.
Right.
So,
So adding more money is not gonna, it's
well,
not gonna help.
once though, I will say, once they understand how to do that and actually understand, um, are they making a profit or not? Or, what's their revenue? What's their expenses? It becomes a whole lot easier just to figure things out. And then you can decide, is it worth investing to scale? Because every time you grow, there's a dead zone, right? If you
Yeah, a little
hire
bit.
a new lawyer, it costs money to do that, and they don't generate the income for a period of time, right? So
Right.
you have to invest in them.
True.
Um,
No, that's really true. But also, I think where lawyers don't see themselves as business owners, and they should, is in the marketing too. It's
mhm.
like communicate, because it did, seeing the practice of law change, right? That level of professionalism and respect and civility for the ethics and the practice of law has been going down and down and down and being diluted with a lot of different things. But it's messaging to your audience, to the market, right? And explaining to them the value that a lawyer can bring
Sure.
to their transaction, right? And trying to, so we are it's not as easy. It's not as much of a given that people need a lawyer anymore. So we have to listen to the market
Hmm.
and provide alternatives. So an example that I see a lot is lawyers arbitrarily setting their hourly rate, right? Oh, well, you hear some lawyers who start up and they're like, well, my rate is cheaper because I don't have the overhead that a larger firm has. And it's like, what does that have to do with the quality of your work? Are you
Right.
a good lawyer? Do you know what you're doing?
Right.
Like, or people call my office and they're asking my assistant, well, how much is it going to cost? Well, she is never allowed to quote prices over the phone, because if I quote my hourly rate, they're going to go, bye, right? So what happens is some other firm is going to, you know, charge a lower rate maybe for one of these young lawyers, right? Oh,
Right.
well, I'm going to offer you a cheaper hourly rate because I've got a young lawyer. Well, guess what? It takes them twice as long
Yeah.
and they're probably going to mess something up. Is that what you want? Or you pay, a higher hourly rate for, for a lawyer who's going to get it done and get it done right.
Yeah.
So how do you have a conversation with potential client?
What's that?
How do you have that conversation with a potential client when they're asking you that question? How much are you going, or how much you're going to charge me? What is your hourly rate?
I usually start with the value that I'm
Right.
providing before I get to that. So when I come in to a sales conversation, right, I have my intake person screens them first, so I'm not spending my time talking to people who are not a fit. We quote a consultation fee.
Okay.
And it used to be I would waive it for referrals, and I still do sometimes, or it was first a free consultation, then it was a free consultation that gets applied to their project, right? They hire us, that sort of thing. But so that you kind of screen them out. But then I always come into the conversation with all the ways I can add value to them first before I tell them my hourly rate, how much it's going to cost. And also I've developed, you talk about these alternative fee structures where there's like flat rates, some packages. I created a monthly program. I call it the Legal Essentials program that includes certain items, and they pay a flat amount per month, and they get access to a lawyer. They can call and email me as much as they want. Because guess what? They actually, once they get the meat of their questions answered, they're off running their business, and I don't hear from them for months. So people think, oh, I don't want to offer them unlimited calls and emails because I'm going to be on the phone with them all the time. It's actually just, yeah, that's, at least my clients are business owners, so they don't have time to be hanging out on the on the phone with me
Yeah,
necessarily.
that's what I call the gym subscription program, right? People sign up for the gym, but they never go. And it makes sense that they would have some core questions. You get those answered, but they're not burning up your phone all the time because they got other things to be doing.
Right. So, and that's where, where you have to make sure that whatever way you have charging your client has to meet all the ethics rules, right?
Hmm.
Because that is where if you offer a flat rate, there are different rules about, what money can go into your operating account and what you have to include in your engagement agreement. And even these retainer programs where you charge a flat amount, it's a true retainer, which is that, you will be available. They're paying for you to be available
Right.
if and when they need you. And then my 12-month program, I say, is really almost like a payment plan. It includes, a trademark, an entity, a contract, and like actual legal services
Hmm.
that if they pay for it all up front, they may choose one or the other. And I say they need it all. So it spreads the cost out.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's interesting. I do fee arbitrations for our county bar, and you're right. There are very specific rules about how you have to deal with flat rates and
Mhm.
where they have to go. And a lot of the times, the reason these people are in trouble is because they haven't, their contract is completely invalid. It doesn't cover any of the things that they're supposed to. So
Right.
it's, it is one of the challenges of, the way our current legal system is, or our current legal education system is set up, is they're not teaching people how to do this stuff, the nuts and bolts of how to run a firm, so you don't get yourself in trouble.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that that's unfortunate. I think that they still believe in this idea that you're going to go to a firm and somebody's going to teach you. But
Mhm.
I don't think that business model works very well anymore. I don't think that that's what's going on. So,
No, no, there isn't. Or even just how to bill a client. I mean, I
mhm,
had when my first law firm, I had a really wonderful mentor who, I would sit there and bill in my 6-minute increments, right?
mhm,
And put all my time in, and off it would go. And then, you never see it as a young lawyer, but then I had a partner who would actually sit down and number one, I was probably giving him like heartburn with the way I was billing and inputting my time. So he probably sat down to say, I need to teach her how to do this so I don't have to spend so much time on the billing. Because
right,
again, that's another problem I see with lawyers too. They do the work, but then they don't get their bills out. And
mhm,
then it's like 30, 60 days later, and the client's like, wait, what am I paying you for? Right.
right,
So he was wonderful because he sat down and he said, And at the time, insurance companies won't pay for this. They will, and the client doesn't want to pay for lawyers talking to each other, right? And you don't do a big old chunk of billing together, right? You take it by item, and you put your time, and it's just this.
which of course is the most ineffective way to actually do it.
What's
It,
that?
it is breaking your projects up. I mean, it makes sense to do a project in, while you're in the flow and just
Mhm.
rocking through it, as opposed to, oh, I'll start and then I'll do it a little bit later. And then also the other idea, if you're talking to other lawyers, you should be speeding the process up, not just chit-chatting, right? Um,
Well,
you know,
and that's what clients say too, is I'm afraid to call my lawyer because I'm going to get a bill.
right.
And if I talk to my lawyer about my kids' sports, then my lawyer's going to send me a bill for that too, right? And that's like I always tell people, I'm not billing. I like to get to know my clients. I'm not going to send you a bill for that part.
Right.
So,
But
Dan, I'm curious. Have you ever had that intake meeting with a prospective client who's agreed to, to pay your initial consultation fee, where the fit wasn't there?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
I had one not too long ago where I just did not have a great feeling, and then I tried to tell him, well, I said I might not be the best fit for you. There might be somebody's got to be out there other than me who's going to be your client. And he's like, no, no, I don't know why that I would go to anybody else. You obviously, know what you're doing. Da, da. So I just quoted a really high rate and a really high retainer. And I'm like, well, and I mean, it's the highest rate and retainer I'd ever asked for. And he hasn't come back. So he's sort of self-selected.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well,
But
that was a good way to handle it.
I got
So,
good. I got good at just telling people no, just flat out no. And I I get it, and I've done it where you charge a higher retainer, you charge a higher rate. But um, if my experience has been that if you feel like it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit, and it's going
mm,
to cost you in the end somehow.
that's
So
true. That's
um,
true.
you know
And
the
yeah, and I have learned that lesson.
yeah.
Kind of the
Yeah,
hard way.
the
But
power of saying no is actually one of the most powerful things that changed kind of the way our firm started was doing business, and so now we're pretty selective. Um,
mm.
as I mean, yeah, you still need to bring in the revenue, but we just don't bring in everything that walks through the door anymore.
Well, and what I'll do, and that's where really having a good screening process is really important. Because then, like I said, you end up talking to the people that that are actually a good fit. I mean, I do end up seems like it's other than that one that just stands out for the most part. By the time I get on the phone with someone, they're coming to me from referrals. Just like if I'm going to refer someone to another lawyer, I'm not going to send them the type of person that's going to be like sucking their time. So I really feel like I've been talking to people that are worthwhile. And I also it's actually a kind of a stream of revenue, because then I'll say we don't handle that, but I can give you to so and so, and I can give you to so and so, and then I've got referral fee arrangements with a lot of different lawyers, which is also different from a law practice perspective, because frankly, a lot of lawyers frown on paying referral fees
Hmm.
outside of the personal injury litigation kind of context, where those lawyers, they know, yeah, they'll pay referral fees.
Right.
But I've had people just, "Oh, that's terrible."
Well, and
You would ask for a referral fee.
one of the reasons that they balk is because they don't understand what an acquisition cost is. What does it cost to get a client in the door? And it's a whole lot more than they probably think.
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah. They haven't seen my marketing budget, right?
yeah,
Social media, and you have to be everywhere. It's LinkedIn, Instagram, and I'm, all these. Yeah, and then exactly, it's like I'm paying money to bring in a client, and I'm handing that client to you,
right, right.
and I ask for like 15%.
Yeah,
It's not a lot. It's my cost that you would be spending on ads and different things like that. So,
right.
true.
Yeah. Well, again, it comes back to people just aren't. properly trained in business. It costs money to market, in as particularly in this competitive environment, and particularly in LA. I mean, there's, you can't. What's the saying? You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a lawyer down there, right? It certainly was true in Sacramento. And so you do have to compete, and not only do you have to spend the money, but you have to be on top of it. What's your messaging, and is it working? And just because it worked last week doesn't mean it works this week.
True.
Um, so you got to keep an eye on it, and yeah. But I think the fundamental problem is they don't understand the value of when you hand them a client. Holy cow, you just saved them a ton of money.
Well, and you know what? And again, this is where, a lot of lawyers they want to say, well, I will refer to you, you refer to me, and we're going to have a mutual referral arrangement. Yeah, but as a practical matter, I found I was giving, I mean, I tried that. I would give a lot of referrals and they were not coming back.
Hmm.
And sometimes they weren't coming back just because simply the practice area, like I said, I use estate planning as an example. I give a lot of estate planning referrals. Again, I mean, probably the next step is I may bring an estate planner in of counsel like I have with my other specialty areas, but these estate planning attorneys, I was giving a lot of business to these estate planning attorneys and they weren't referring them back. And it wasn't even necessarily that they weren't trying. It's just what just wasn't natural for them to be referring back to me sometimes.
Right.
So I mean it's fine, but it's just it's a little bit, and I'm happy to pay a referral fee. Like so it's a reciprocal
Right.
relationship, but
Well, because you
So
understand what your acquisition costs are. So,
right, exactly.
that's
Right,
that's
exactly.
fine.
So,
what
but
goes on
that's
to goes back to
yeah,
the earlier conversation about running a business and understanding how to be a business owner, right?
Right.
Well,
exactly.
knowing what a P&L means to this conversation. So, Dan, where do you see your practice going or being? What's it going to look like the next 10, 15 years? Have you thought that far out?
Well, I'm not going to be sitting in this chair in 10, 15 years, that's for sure.
So what's the succession plan?
So the succession plan is yeah, so I looked at selling my practice and I thought that was kind of an interesting thing is the kind of the valuation process.
Mhm.
But we are professional services, it's really tied to us. And then because I've been doing this, I've been practicing law almost 30 years and I've had my practice, you know, 15, 20 years, almost 18 years, something. So yeah, I mean, I'm working on my succession plan as we speak, but, but I looked at selling the practice. I looked at merging the practice with another firm, but, I guess I don't want to count to anybody else.
Right.
I'm very independent. I like to do things my own way. And what I found is like when I was talking to these other firms about bringing my practice to theirs, I was like, oh no, I'm not going back. I had a law partner one time. That was enough. I was on partnership track and I was doing the billable time. And I'm at the point where I'm unemployable and I would not be able to work. So that wasn't a thing. So now what I am is I'm grooming a couple of lawyers that are working with me to potentially start bringing, so it's not me only bringing in the work, number one, but also being able to have other people do the work product, right, to provide the legal services. So my thought is really, I'm just gonna give them work and have them bring work and start to just slowly step out until I'm just being paid a referral fee.
Well, I,
So
I
what?
will I will give you a little bit of hope. It is possible to sell a firm. I did, in a very niched market with a very niche kind of firm. So it is possible to do it. Um, but I'm not saying it's easy, but it absolutely is possible.
Possible. Yeah. So maybe something to look into. But in the meantime, I'm not waiting for retirement to do what I want to do, which is a lot of traveling. So I'm just booking trips and I'm going. I was in Ireland, I'm going to Scotland, I'm going to, Canada this year, Mexico, Canada, and Scotland this year, Puerto Rico next year. So I'm just like booking it and figuring the rest out.
That's a great attitude.
Yeah,
So
good
what
for you.
message do you have for the young attorneys just coming out of school, trying to begin their career in law? Any message?
I think that they need to do their research and go into a practice area where ultimately they're going to be satisfied with, with where they're spending their time and where they're spending their days. Because like I said, I came out of law school and I just fell into litigation because that's where it was. And I did find it interesting and fascinating, but ultimately it was not in keeping with my personality. I'm not that aggressive, that lawyer who likes to argue for the sake of argument kind of person. So I'd say just research. There are many different fields of law. There's estate planning and business, and there's DAs and public defenders, and there's so many different types of law. So I'd say spend time to make sure that you end up in the right space. Try working in different firms and get experience.
So, DeAnn, if someone wants to reach you, how do they contact you?
So they can look so I'm a Chase Law Group, Manhattan Beach, California. You can find me on Instagram at Chase Law Group. DeAnn Chase on LinkedIn. So anybody's welcome to call me if they ever have any questions.
Well, this has been wonderful. So glad to be able to spend this time with you and learn about your journey. Thanks so much, DeAnn.
Thanks for inviting me, and I'm glad to be able to, hopefully something that I said helped someone and that light bulb went on and keep them from making some of the mistakes I made.
Thanks so much.
All right.
We
Thank
have a
you.
wonderful-
Thank you.